Hello and welcome to a new episode of Leadership Lanes. Today, our guest is Michael Gasch. He's a product manager at AWS. Prior to being a product manager, he was a staff too at VMware's Office of the CTO. Welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Hey, Abhijit, nice to meet again.
To start with, your technical IT career started as an ops admin, I believe, to engineering and research roles, and now as a TPM, technical product manager. So, walk us through these pivots and your experience with each of these roles.
Yes, and I'll keep it brief, not to bore our listeners, but also to stay within the time because now I'm looking back at a more than 20-year career. So there's been a bunch of hops in between. I started after school. I started a training program. That's what we call here for computer science. It was 3 years, and in that time I had a job in the at the Max Planck Society. So that is a research institute, but it's not computer science research. It is literally researching the human history and stuff like that. They also won a couple of Nobel prizes over the years, so that's a great institution. And there I was as you said, I was an IT ops person. I did like installations, Windows installations, and then server stuff later because that group there at the Max Planck Society, were doing a lot of CT scans, so they required a lot of storage. So that got me into distributed systems, but from an admin perspective. So I didn't really know what was going on under the covers. I was just buying hardware and stitching it together with Linux and using some software there. Then I was there 6-7 years or so, and then I moved on to Dell Technologies, Dell Computers. There I was a specialist, or they called it a solution architect, where I was responsible for designing infrastructure, hardware infrastructure projects. Looking back, not super exciting from a learning perspective, technical learning perspective, because that came all later. But it was good to work closer with sales and customers. So that got me actually in my first customer position. And that gave me a good perspective of what customers want, and that customers are not always, what I think is good for customers not necessarily is good for them, or they have different views on this one. So that was good for perspective shaping. And then I moved on also, like after 7 years or so, I moved on to VMware. And there I started in a field role at VMware, also like designing software-defined data center solutions, so from the hardware to the software at VMware. But it was also at the time around 2015 where Kubernetes and all these container orchestrators came up, Mesos and Nomad and all the other ones, which have since then disappeared. And that got me into a bunch of people at VMware because they were also exploring that from an engineering perspective. And that later then involved me into getting into engineering, actually at VMware in an engineering role in office of the CTO. And that was split a little between open source engineering and contributions, customer engagements, but also research. So VMware had a research group, and I was working with the research group on some projects because they were also overlapping and researching in areas of Kubernetes. And so there was a good mix there. There was a time when I also started blogging, which unfortunately lately I didn't have much time for. But that you can clearly see from my blogging, like what was top of mind during that time. And then after another 7 years, so you see the pattern there, 777, I joined AWS as a product manager or product manager tech, what we call them. And there I'm more, as the name says, I'm less so in an engineering role, more in a product-oriented role, which was an interesting move that I wasn't sure whether I would be capable of, fulfilling the role, fitting the role. But looking back now, after not one and a quarter year, it was a great decision, and I learned a lot. Like I keep learning a lot because the scale that AWS operates on is just mind-blowing.
A couple of follow-up questions on that, right? I mean, I would like to know your perspective or your reflections on the field role that you had before the Octo role. Was it more solution oriented or was it more engineering oriented?
It was, I would say, more solution oriented in the beginning, because that was even in the name. We were called solution architects or solution engineers. However, because at that time also the whole Kubernetes came up, which at that time there weren't many solutions out there. It was mostly stitching open source together and working with customers and seeing how they are doing it. That was then more engineering oriented. And since I started as an IT ops person, and the training program that I had was also on like administration and infrastructure and not on development. So there were two tracks, and I was like, okay, I'm too stupid for developer. So I picked the other one, which is not to say that the other one was easier or is less valuable, because I learned a lot from that level as well. However, later, when Kubernetes was like emerging, I was looking back at this point in time when I made the decision against becoming a software developer, because even though Kubernetes had some documentation in the beginning, it was often outdated and also not first class in terms of, it had some basic concepts. And but I was so curious to learn, okay, how does this multi or like etcd database work in an active, or at least in a highly available setup, and how does the scheduler work and all this stuff. So that was interesting, but I could only read documentation and not code by that time, and that then forced me into because the real documentation was the code by that time, and Kubernetes, the one that was then later released, is written in Go. And so that got me into Go, the programming language. So I had to teach myself Go. I mean, I did a bit of Python and Perl and Bash, but I would not consider what I did there as programming, not even like as engineering. And so learning the Kubernetes code base, which meant also learning Go, the programming language, was not an easy task, but it was worth it, because the way I was looking and interested in Kubernetes as like, how does the schedule and zonal placement and multi-AZ stuff work? That curiosity I also applied to the Go programming language. So I didn't just want to learn Go, like the basics to read the source code. I actually got intrigued by the way that the language is designed and the patterns there, and also the concurrency aspect. And so that got me actually deep into Go and Kubernetes, which took a bit of time, but looking back was the right decision, because I kind of discovered, I think, that there is an engineer in me. And so I was just following my passion that then led me to an engineering role. And I had some really nice people around me at VMware that were trusting in me. So Imad Benjamin, right? You know him very well. So Imad, if you hear this, hey, from our side, and he trusted in me at that time. And he said, "Yeah, well, you'll do it. You'll figure it out." And so I did. And that then was the move into engineering. So I would say it was maybe a year that I was more on the solution side, which then more pivoted into engineering.
It's interesting that you talk about Kubernetes, and there were a couple of PMs that came in as a guest on the podcast, and those were not necessarily TPMs, but more on the business side. And they also mentioned that having Kubernetes knowledge did help them get into the job and even navigate into the job.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
what are your thoughts on that, on Kubernetes? And by the way, I also plan to do a three to four episode series on Kubernetes, which is next in January.
Nice.
If you have some thoughts on that as well.
Yes. So I would say having spent time with Kubernetes, like from a learning, but then also as a contributor, and then open source in general, is definitely something that I would recommend anyone who's interested in tech stuff. Not necessarily because Kubernetes solves all the problems, which the project never aimed to be. It was just then pushed by some people, or that Kubernetes is the thing to solve all problems. But because it's an interesting platform with an interesting design decisions by the people who created it. And since Kubernetes was not the first attempt by the people who built it, it's kind of a second or third incarnation, if you will, from the early people at Google and Reddit, and then later the other people who joined the community. That alone is a treasure of knowledge which is in there. And as a PM, a product manager, I would say, like, for technical product managers like we are, I think you have to be technical, which means you should at least have some understanding of Kubernetes if that is in your domain. I mean, there are product managers at AWS that are very far away from container space, etc. So I would not necessarily recommend them, oh, take a look at Kubernetes, unless they are really interested in it. However, for me and the customers I work with and the domain I'm in, like now with AWS in a service team that we build event-driven applications and architectures, and so do our customers. And our customers have a variety of platforms and services that they use, including Kubernetes. That knowledge definitely helped. And because if you learn Kubernetes, you also learn containers, like the primitives, but then also the the Dockers and everything that is around there. So that is also still a hot topic today. And so having a good understanding of what that brings helps. And a little anecdote before I wrap this up on this one. They in my group with my peers, with my product manager peers, we also do like scripts and simplifications for our daily work. And it turned out that using containers there is also very helpful, because if you have to install a bunch of Python library on your machine, well, guess what? The installation is always going to look different on all those laptops, right? Someone's on Windows, someone's on Mac and Linux. And so I basically applied my knowledge there in that regard, and my colleagues valued it because that got them into containers as well, and they felt like literally as a user and developer the benefits of containers. So long story short, I think Kubernetes is a great thing to learn and know about, unless you're very far away from it.
That's an insightful take. One question here on Kubernetes, and sorry if I'm digressing a bit. With the current resurgence of AI ML, you think 3-4 years down the line, will Kubernetes evolve? Will Kubernetes have a place, or you see something else getting evolved in order to support those AI ML payloads that will be very much heavy in the near future?
Yes, good question. So if you look at the cloud providers, and I'm more comfortable with what AWS is doing in that space, we offer again a variety of platform or services and capabilities to build and run AI workloads, from like model training up to building a software as a service or application that internally uses AI. And this is again a spectrum that on one end is like highly abstracted. You literally just call a model and you get the response back. You don't even see what's happening underneath, right? And so that is quick time to value for developers who want to build SaaS applications and services. On the other hand, especially for enterprises or customers who have invested in Kubernetes, I think for them, it could also, like with any other stuff that Kubernetes runs these days, it's more like a natural evolution and path for them to build on what they already have and what they invested in and what the skill set is. And if that is AI platforms and workloads on top of Kubernetes, because they have custom requirements to build models, or the application architectures on Kubernetes, and they just want to stitch it together and they want to keep that, or they run in hybrid environments that they have on-premises stuff, or they build for customers who are on environments where you need to have something installable or disconnected from the network, etc., etc. So I think Kubernetes will definitely have a play there, because it's very agnostic to the actual workload it's running. It's if Kubernetes itself, the core is very low level, right, as a platform, and but it's capable of running all these different workloads. So I believe down the road, yes, Kubernetes will have a stake in AI, and we already see that with projects on top of this. But AI is like the whole space is obviously beyond just Kubernetes.
That's right. True. Moving on to the product aspect itself, right? So after Staff 2, which essentially was a technical role, mostly research engineering oriented, you might have explored various options to pivot to. And can you shed some light on those, and what led? What led to TPM is what you already answered, but can you shed some light on the
Yes.
roles that you explored?
Yeah. And actually, I was not sure whether a product manager or technical product management would be a right fit for me, because it has, first of all, some very unique requirements on the role that I felt I would not meet at that time and have. And so my other areas that I was exploring when I was looking for a change in my career were more engineering focused, like just continue that path and maybe do like stuff with Kubernetes somewhere, or I was working also on an event-driven platform at VMware by the time, and there were some ideas of taking this idea further. So basically staying within the engineering space. However, when I was like talking to AWS and the great team that I then later joined, we had many conversations, not just one. We had many conversations around this question: would I be a good fit for the TPM role? First of all, like, can I make this the jump, the leap? And then also, why would I be a good fit for that team? Like, what is the value that I bring to this team? Given that I don't have this strong product manager background, more like this engineering background, right? And to me, a product manager, and this is my other manager, Nick, now. So Nick, if you heard that, and the group, hi again, and thanks for convincing me that this is a great role to join. To me, product manager or like technical product managers have like three main capabilities that they need to bring to the table. Obviously, a business understanding, and not just understanding the business of customers, but also understanding your own business, being highly like fluent with data warehouse and analytics and this kind of things, which I felt was my weakest area at that point in time. The other one is having a very deep technical understanding. Technical product manager at AWS are like very, very technical, to an extent that I have not seen often before joining AWS. And also to an extent, I was like, okay, these people seem to be engineers. Like they just think like engineers. And that is mind blowing, given all the other things that product managers have to do, technical product managers. And by the way, there is a difference between a product manager and a technical product manager at AWS. So when I talk about product manager, I mean the technical one, right? And the third one is then, it's having these social skills of being able to like talk to customers, being able to present, like communication skills are required there as well, which I had because I came from a customer background and then sales oriented roles. So the biggest question was can I make the leap and fill that void in the business capabilities that would be needed? And there were a lot of conversations around that, if and why I should pursue that route.
A couple of points that you mentioned, right? And this is something that I've seen a general pattern when I'm speaking to PMs or technical product managers in general who have pivoted from engineering roles. One is imposter syndrome, and
Absolutely.
in fact, everyone who I spoke with said that they were not sure whether
Yes.
they'll be able to make it in the role. That's one. And second one was that majority of them also did say that the manager pushed them and convince them to do that role. And I believe those are two key aspects here to look out for. We want to make that pivot.
Absolutely. And that was very important for me because I had I was looking back at more than 20 years of a career. So you have a little bit of experience. And so you know what works and what doesn't. You can trust your gut more because of the experience that you have. And that's why I spent so much time with that team, and they had the patience with me to really investigate whether I'm a good fit and that role is a good fit for myself. And then there's this other aspect of the remote role. I was hired during the COVID time, and so where everyone is remote. And that the question there was, given time zones, 9 hours offset from my time zone versus where the majority of my team is, can that work? That was another question as well. And I had some really good experience from my time with VMware because it was the same time zone that my team was there in. And so that experience was helpful in making the decision and being very open and in those discussions with the interviews.
That's true. So moving on to the next question. So given your experience in both technical and managerial TPM roles, what trends have you observed in the tech industry and how they have influenced your career decisions and product management strategies? Now, this probably is more coming from the fact that PMs and TPMs are looked upon as glamorous roles these days, typically. So what is your thought on that?
Yeah. And help me if I did not get the question 100% right. And so first question, is this like a look back or a look ahead? This
Look
question.
ahead. Look
This
ahead.
is a look ahead.
Look
Okay.
ahead. Yeah.
So first of all, I agree with you that the product manager roles, especially at AWS, are like highly valued. And this is also what kind of finally sold me on making the role as the next career move, because you have a very high influence and also responsibility in that role to drive change, and that is what I want. Like, I think every engineer, because that was my background right at that time, wants to change and improve things and innovate, right? And product managers at AWS, that's the absolute spot you want to be in. Now, this is not to say that the all the functions around that, especially engineering and then sales and technical specialists, etc., are not as glamorous. They are, to me, it's like they're all required, and it's like this shared responsibility model there. And especially with our engineering team and the team that I work closely with, I had imposter syndrome. Like, I still have it every day since joining, because I'm just surrounded by so many smart and talented people there. So the imposter one is like spot on that you said as well. Now, looking ahead a little bit, please frame the question once more for me in terms of what I see on the horizon for PMs in general, or for the tech industry.
For the tech industry in general, and looking at the pattern historically and looking ahead, how does how do you kind of influence these patterns in making career switches? Say, for example, someone from engineering now is pondering to switch into managerial roles,
Yes,
PM,
yes,
TPMs,
yes,
etc. So how
yes.
do you view these patterns? Because these patterns might be temporary as well. You never know.
True, true. I think this is, first of all, very individual. Like, it's a very individual decision, obviously. And if you look at my career, it's like jumping, like very cross. It's not a very linear career that I have, which was not a wise decision in all cases, because, as I said later, I was missing the whole software development and engineering and even university, education that would have definitely been helpful in learning faster. At the same time, not having that and always forcing myself into these new roles and having to adapt also led me, like, because of the curiosity that I had, led me very deep into areas. And I was just keeping like, that's one pattern that I always had, is like, how does this work? Why does this work? And what does it bring? Like, not just me, but why it's useful to know that. And that curiosity, I think, was the driver behind all those different like changes and moves that I made. So to me, that is a pattern. So, like, if you're not super interested in going deep, and you have more like aspirations and maybe going from individual to in a more managerial, like managing people, that is definitely something. First of all, everyone has to answer themselves, like, where do they see themselves in the next 3 to 5 years? For example, I can tell you, I don't see myself in a manager role. Like directing people, I'm probably very bad at that. I'm rather an individual. And what I can also tell you is that it also depends on the context where you are in. For example, I've been working for American US based companies, and there the individual contributor is equally reputed in the career ladder. Like, there's we have principal engineers and then distinguished, etc. So the career ladder doesn't stop at senior, and then if you want to grow, you have to go to manager role, right? Whereas in Germany, where I'm based, often you will find exactly this, where your career ladder as an individual contributor ends at some point, and then you have to make a move. You're kind of forced into a very different role, which you probably, like, I would not like. And so I think that is also very important, the context, the environment where you're in, like the people that trust you, that people can help you. I was lucky as well. Luck is also a pattern, like being lucky to be at the right time, at the right place. For example, when I joined AWS, it was just a perfect match that lined up. So yeah, there's a bunch of patterns in there that make, it's not just one, it's a bunch. Yeah.
Got it. One question, and maybe I am not making it organic here. One question, and then that typically comes to my mind very regularly. So, as a staff too, you might be writing a few documentation pieces, and as a TPM as well, I'm pretty sure you might be writing some documentation pieces.
Oh yeah, you're right about
Uh,
that.
so, so do you see a difference between how you used to structure these documentation pieces in while being staff too, as opposed to while being a TPM?
Yes, and I would even say even let's say a staff 2 at company X and a staff 2 at company Y, even there you might have differences in how you write or how you develop whatever your role is, right? I can tell you that at AWS, it's very different, how you write, how you communicate, how you work, versus the role I was in at VMware. It's just a very different culture, very different processes there as well. So even from the outside, it looks like, oh, you did maybe product manager there and there. So you're a PM. How do I become a PM, or how do you work as a PM? Again, that question is very context sensitive in the area you're in. And in the on the staff 2 side, obviously my documents and the contributions that I made were more technical, like code contributions, guiding teams, mentoring teams, educating people on the engineering side. We had, like, we grow a lot, like we hired a lot of junior people. So that was also an interesting learning experience for myself. Versus then in the TPM role or PMT role at AWS, I'm more like individual, first of all, in that role. So I own specific parts of our services and capabilities that I need to drive, that I need to make sure is a healthy business or becomes a healthy business, and that we innovate in. And that requires, as part of our culture, writing a lot. And I encourage everyone who is not familiar with the AWS way of writing and this peculiar culture that we have to just Google around AWS narratives and writing styles. There's a lot of public documentation of how AWS works internally, and it's expanded my mind and capabilities in ways I've never imagined before. And writing matters a lot. Whether you blog, whether you write internal documentations to convince someone, whether you write user guides, writing matters because it scales yourself. And that's even more important in my role now than before.
That's true, actually, and I'm doing a series on storytelling as well. We did one on verbal. I'll be doing one on writing as well, actually.
Yes,
So
yes.
that's
And it sounds easy, like, okay, write a document, but writing well, when I joined AWS and I had my first documents written and reviewed, I came out of these meetings as like, okay, I don't know anything and I don't know how to write, which is a weird situation to be in. Again, imposter, because with like more than 20 years of experience, you think you know something and you think you can write and do stuff, but then you basically say, right, that was my motivation. I was not the smartest, but I was the only one in the room at some point in my prior role, to the not smartest person in the room, which is a good situation to be in because you grow, you learn. But it can also feel, especially if you're senior, that you are you get very easy imposter and unconfident in your own capabilities.
That's true. Coming to my last question, and I believe we probably covered this in the previous one itself. Like, what would be that one advice you would give to individuals considering a similar career transition? I believe you gave that, but if you wanted to give your 2 cents.
Yes, I can quickly summarize this again. Like, first of all, I think, especially today, it's really hard because we have all these influences from the outside, from social media, from YouTube. There's all these coaches and rock stars that want to tell and sell you how to get rich and popular or whatever. To me, that is just a very modern form of how humans did that centuries ago and decades ago to convince people to believe in something. I would recommend to listen to yourself very deeply, and that it's probably easier as you get older because you get this experience muscle, right, that you can more trust on. And so for more junior people, which I adore because they have all like the future still ahead, and they have all this crazy stuff to explore, it can feel overwhelming. And it can also feel hard for them to make a decision because they might not have this compass yet that, based on experience, helps them to guide and navigate all those different areas. And to the more junior people, I would recommend reaching out to mentors or more senior people and guiding and helping them. For the senior people, for the more senior people, I would say, there's a reason why they are senior. They have this experience, right? And so they probably should trust their instincts and gut feeling of what they want. And I think these days depending on where you are, it's probably never been easier to pursue your own dreams and what you want. So I would rather not have been influenced by a hype, say AI, and a couple of years ago it was big data. Everyone had to do big data and Python and pandas and Jupyter or AIML, right? And for me that was interesting, but Kubernetes was more interesting. So I did Kubernetes, and it also paid off. So just follow your passion and not necessarily what a hype or someone else, tries to sell you.
That's a great advice to have, actually. And it was great talking to you, Michael, today. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for
Thank
coming
you,
again
Abhijit.
on this podcast.
Thank you. And pleasure meeting again.